Fantasy Sports. Sorry we're a bit late here. A few technical difficulties, but it appears as though we've got everything worked out. I'm Dave Lochran. With me every Monday, breaking down the previous week's slate, is my man, Manny Laura. What's happening, dude?
Nothing, man. Another week in the books. Some good, some bad, some variance, some randomness. But all in all, I think a pretty decent week. Of course, a few surprises happens every week, but that's NFL, man. And all we could do is study up a little bit, get better, and look forward to week 5.
And you're with Fantasy Cruncher, and we offer the Fantasy Cruncher add-on at awesomemode.com. So one thing we like to do on Mondays, and I think it's really important, is knowing that we have access to lineup study,
Right.
to really go through it and see where the winning lineups were right, where the losing lineups were wrong. I mean, you can sometimes go down the list and you'll see someone that entered 150 lineups and say the Millie Maker, and they lost like 95%. Was it just everything that could go wrong did go wrong, or they made some legitimate mistakes with a 120 player pool, right? Or just going super overweight on a heavy core. There's so many different ways to do this right and wrong. But I think it'll be interesting once we get into the lineup that won the Millie Maker for sure, knowing that he had only 4% of the quarterback that was in his winning lineup.
Yeah, it's I think for the most part, because I've done this for quite a while now, right? Every time I go back and look at prior weeks, and not just Millie Maker winners, just go even to the high stakes where there's a lot less entries and you don't rely on those outlier scores so much, right? People that make really good lineups for a living and play this for a living. I think analyzing their lineups probably has a little more value. When you look at those lineups, I think over the last few years, there's been a trend where I've always just kind of seen without really realizing until, over the last year, I kind of took notice. It's people who differentiate well, right? And I wouldn't say cover all your bases, because that's the wrong angle. That's the wrong way to say it. But guys who have exposure to different games, different stacks, different teams, when you do that and kind of put yourself in different like good places throughout every slate, you give yourself chances to win, right? And I think people forget when they're playing tournaments, we're still in really bad payout structures, right? Where some of these tournaments are so top heavy. Yeah, it's a lot of money, which is why second, third, and fourth and fifth place looks so decent. But for the most part, if you're not in that top 5, you're really not making money in most of these tournaments, right? And if you play to the tune of what the tournament is and what the payout structure is, I think you can do a lot better going forward. And that's what some of these top players do, right? They expose themselves to maybe 5, 6, 7, 10, 12 quarterbacks on a given week, where it's not all 24 quarterbacks like it was yesterday on the main slate, but you cover half, or at least the guys that are projected to do well, and then let variance take its course. Because, yeah, we all know, believe me, we all know who the top quarterback is every week, right?
Right.
We know it's Mahomes most of the time. We know it's going to be, Aaron Rodgers in really good matchups. We know it's going to be Russell Wilson, right? We know it's going to be all these guys who have the upside, but it doesn't always play out like that. And I think that's what we fail to realize. We make the fine plays, but when variance takes its course, which it does every single week, we have to be ready for that. And I think that's where some people lack.
No question. So we'll break all of this down. Our boy Adam Scher shipped my money, had a big day over on fantasydraft.com. Congratulations to you. And of course, Alex Matos asked us to break down the single entry $100, I believe the SPY, 50,000 the first. So congratulations, man. That's a huge win. But first, let me just get into something. Mike Campbell asked how Lambeau Field was. Should I tell the story?
Dude, yeah, go for it, man. I'd love to hear this, man. You seemed like you had a good time outside of everything else, but you'll get into that.
All right. So we get to Lambeau Field. I'm a huge Eagles fan. So are my neighbors and my boys. We of course all went down there. 4 of us caught a flight down to Lambeau Field, down to Green Bay, and tailgated, watched the game. I mean, by the time I got in, I was in some condition, but I do remember the entirety of it, so that's good. And we got the win. That's very important for one reason, and I'll tell you right now. So we wake up the next day, and we get an alert that our flight has been canceled.
Ooh.
So we say, all right, screw it. Let's rent a car. So I ran a nice Jeep Grand Cherokee. It was a $7 upgrade from the Ford Escape. How can you say no to that?
Right.
We drive 3.5 hours to O'Hare Airport. We get there. Our flight's delayed from 5:13 to 6:30. So, no big deal. Then it's delayed to 7, then 7:30, then 8:30, then 9:30, then 10:30, then 11:30. So all right, this is miserable. So they didn't have a pilot. They didn't have a captain. The captain finally gets there, and they start boarding the plane. As they're boarding the plane, big canceled comes up on the screen. They canceled the flight while they were boarding the plane. And here's the greatest. The pilot was 8 minutes over his allowed flight time, and the FAA wouldn't let him get up in the air.
But is this like overtime for pilots?
I guess so. Like, well, you know how like truckers can only drive so much.
I didn't even know that, but okay.
Yes. Oh yeah. Like, so you don't end up like who's the guy that got hit by the Walmart truck? You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. I get what you're talking. I get what you're saying. All right.
But this is wild. So it turns out the reason he was going to be 8 minutes over is because they forgot to turn the plane on, and the cabin temperature inside was 92 degrees. So they had to spend 20 minutes to cool it down. So that's 8 of the minutes that would have put him over. So we say, screw it. We're going to rent a car. I'm going to drive home 12 hours. Each of us, it'll take us 3 hours, whatever, right? We'll sleep in the ride. There wasn't a rental car agency within 30 miles that had an available car or a hotel within 30 miles. So we go out 20, 25, 30 miles. I guess it would have been to this Motel 6. It was such a shitty place that it had a bottle opener screwed into the bathroom. Okay? And no, Robert, it was American Air. The Spirit. Come on, my friend. Come on. Easy. I didn't win the Millie, but I can afford something better than Spirit. So we go home, we sleep there, we get back up at 7:30, we find the car agency, we rent another car and drive 2.5 hours to South Bend, Indiana. All right? We get to South Bend, Indiana, and the entire airport is without power. The entire airport has no power from the night before. So
sounds like a movie.
Oh, dude, you couldn't make this up, right? and we finally get on a plane. Not even our plane. Our plane was delayed 2 hours. We would have missed our connecting flight. So the pilot, some 25-year-old kid, decides to put us on another plane. We get on, and we go back to Philly, which was the only place that was going. Now, you're like, okay, you're going back to Philly. That's your area. Well, I flew out of Newark. So I finally get to Philly through a connecting flight from Detroit. And I have to take 2 trains to get back to Newark. I got home around, I think, 12:30, 1 a.m. Literally the worst run bed you could ever the worst run bed you could ever consider in your life. If the Eagles didn't win, I may have busted out one of those plane windows and jumped.
Oh my goodness. By the way, what was total time in this drive / 10 flights, delayed, everything?
37 hours.
We laugh about it now, but you were not laughing the whole time.
37 hours, not including the 4 hours we slept in a Motel 6 that I thought I was going to get robbed at. Bro.
Dude, that's pretty bad, man.
Yeah.
I'm not going to lie. That's
horrible. Yeah. Robert Gall says may have been faster to walk. No, it was, listen, man, you can't make that up, right? Like,
no, of course not.
You cannot make that up. But thank God the Eagles won, because to actually answer your question, Mike, Lambeau was awesome. It was an incredible time. We loved it. We got the win. Green Bay fans almost are too nice.
Wait, I saw a fight broke out in the stands. I saw that.
Yeah, I mean it's. I hate those people that give us a terrible name because it's not all of us. But a fight broke out. Green Bay fans were nice to the point where it scared me. Like they were gonna come back and shank me in my back because they were too nice. Like why is this happening? But no, great experience. I would suggest anybody that wants to go to Lambeau go. Just make sure the forecast looks okay. And don't get caught in my situation. But yeah, Breezy, around the world. And it was literally planes, trains, and automobiles, right? We did all of that. But total travel time or in airport time was about 32 hours, not including the 4 hours we slept.
No, thank you. I'm
Well,
good.
there's the story. You ready to talk some football?
Let's do it, baby.
All right. What do you want to analyze first?
Yeah, I think just one of those big time winners. If you want to do, I mean, I know Adam was fantasy draft, so it'd be hard to do that. But if
Want to do the
maybe if we
Millie?
could get just the winning stack, the winning combination, and just maybe analyze how someone would have gotten there, maybe someone who didn't get there, right? I think it had to have been. He mentioned Cooper Cup, so maybe it was some sort of Goff to Cup.
I believe it
Cup
was a Goff, Godwin, Cup, Woods stack, and I think Fournette too.
Right, and I saw the YouTube chat talking about it. We can start with this. The Godwin 0.5% owned play that, depending where you played, right, and a lot of people said, where could someone have landed on something like that? And good question, because it's not like, obviously Godwin isn't a bad player. Maybe it wasn't the best of matchups or anything, but how does someone land on a person like Godwin when he's clearly not chalk? He clearly shouldn't be on anyone's radar, at least. Uh, that's what probably others would think, but it's if you differentiate enough, I think you should get there, right? If you look at this, and I did this morning, right? If you go over every quarterback at the position, right, and see, for example, if you played a lot of Rivers yesterday, Mahomes, Russell Wilson, Daniel Jones, which I think was the consensus top four. If you look at each individual projection for those guys, it really isn't all that different from guys near the bottom end of the ownership spectrum, right? Guys like, I don't know, say Jared Goff, Matt Ryan, Jameis Winston, where those guys are projected 18, 19, 20, and the guys above them are 21, 22, 23. Like a 2 or 3 point projection shouldn't mean a 10 to 15% own difference, right? And when you look at it that way, it makes you realize, well, maybe you should be differentiating a little more than usual, right? Like to have, I don't know, Deshaun Watson at 22 and Jared Goff at 20 and a half, that 1.5 point difference should not mean, I don't know, 5 to 10% own difference, right? To me, it should be really, really close. And if you're running multiple lineups, say 20, 30, 40, 50 lineups, not to mention the 100s and 150s, you should definitely have exposure to these guys. And I think yesterday, if you're looking at how you could possibly land on some of them, if you had Goff, you would have had a little more Cup and Woods and Cooks. And if you had Jameis, you would have had a little more Godwin or Evans. So for me, it's just how do you land on the quarterbacks first, and then the receivers kind of follow. I think maybe if you wanted to be a little bit different and just go down in ownership, I think pivots to not just Winston, but Goff, if you're looking at those two specifically, could have made the difference. And they were very, very viable yesterday, according to their projection.
No, it's a good point. And, a lot of times you'll be pissed because you might have, say, 15% Godwin but he's in all of your Jameis lineups and you have 20% Jameis. And Jameis doesn't have a big game, but you get a big game from Chris Godwin. And Chris Godwin's probably in a lineup with another wide receiver from that team. And if Jameis doesn't have a good game, you're likely, I don't want to say wasting, but you're not maximizing those Godwin lineups. Is there a way that you avoid that? Or would it really just be if he's projected high enough, if you're looking at ownership caps or how maybe he's lower owned than he should be, he'll show up in non-Jameis lineups, so non-stack lineups?
There's a couple ways. So apart from getting him in all the Jameis lineups for sure, right? Because you want Jameis with maybe either 1 or 2 pass catchers. You also get him in the Goff lineups, depending if you're running him back, right? So you kind of have 2 outs there with Godwin. You have Jameis and you have Goff. If none of those work and he really isn't projected all that high, then it's really tough for you to get him as a filler in any random lineup, right? Because there's so many guys projected above him. So you're kind of just banking on guys like that are 0.5% owned with a way lower projection than they normally have because of the matchup. You're just banking on a game stack going ham. And really, when you think about it, that's probably the only real way they get there sometimes, right? Or at least that's the highest probability they get there, because just to have a random Godwin go off in a game that's 20 to 17 with good defense, or at least one good defense on one side, isn't all that probable, right? Isn't all that probable. So you kind of want the game to shoot out, and then giving yourself 2 outs with a 0.5% or a 1% owned guy is still good enough when you look at it in hindsight, to the point where you can't have 20-20 and say, wow, why didn't I get Godwin as a filler with my Russell Wilson lineups or something like that.
Exactly.
Then you're just pushing the need. Now you just want to win the lotto, right? Like now that's ridiculous. So you got to find something that's repeatable, a process that will work time over time, and something that's projectable too. I think stacks was the only way you were going to get Godwin yesterday.
Right. And when you're trying to do that to get him outside of those, you start making manual adjustments that are just
For sure.
minus EV in every way.
For sure.
You know, if there's a spot where I just think a guy is egregiously over or under projected, like I'll make adjustments, but I'm not doing it to make sure he shows up in every lineup.
Yeah, I think just doing those little manual adjustments to make things like that happen could obviously lead to a lot of mistakes, right? Like if you're forcing someone to be in there when they're not supposed to be, I mean, not only are you sacrificing the other player you're taking out, but you're sacrificing the overall projection of a lineup maybe over time. That's going to keep reducing your ROI. I mean, it's so difficult to say you want to force something in every time where you'll do a lot of harm, and I think people don't see it until after the fact. But then, of course, it's way too late. So I'd advise just not forcing anything. Project every game as best as you can, and then make lineups that way. But again, to each his own. If you really, really like a player, have a hunch, that'll be on you. But just know that you are doing that, and that's not what projections say.
Right. Exactly. Now, there are people asking about doing this lineup or that lineup. First of all, yeah, Alex Baker, big day on FanDuel. Congrats to him as well. But right now with lineup study, DraftKings is really the only one that makes it easy for us, right?
Yeah, we had we didn't have a deal with FanDuel. We did FanDuel for a little while. They wanted to sue us almost. So I feel comfortable saying that. So we had to just stop completely. We're still in the works, but we have it ready. It's there. We just cannot upload the tournaments. They don't not let us.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's take a look for a minute. We'll go over a couple of these. At the Millie Maker, four double had 150 entries. Do you know who that is?
I do not know. Nope.
I don't either. He won with 266. He came in 49th place at 233, and 114th and 266. Now, why do I say that? Well, he had 6 lineups with Jared Goff. Okay. The top 4 lineups of his all had Jared Goff. Now, look, you might say, well, yeah, of course they did. But, Manny, that's kind of rare when you see where you only have 6 lineups of a player and you need to nail down those combos. And he had 3 inside the top 115 with Jared Goff of only 6 Jared Goff lineups total.
That's what you aim for with it is what you aim for when you have, stacks, right? And he did run 4-man stacks. So essentially he ran 2 receivers with Goff and game stacked it with an opponent.
But I'm saying his fillers were perfect. I mean, he had Chubb in there as a filler. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So for me, it was because I've studied him already. I think the weird play and the one that kind of won him everything was the Cortland Sutton play because Nick Chubb was, even though he was 3% in the milli, he was a very good play. He was a very good play, and a lot of sharps were on Nick Chubb. I thought DJ was all right. I didn't expect him to have that game, but definitely not surprising. The surprising one was having Cortland Sutton as that flex spot and having him in his top 2 lineups, right? That I think was even crazier. So, and then of course it was one of the late touchdowns. He scored 2, but the late one from Flacco to Sutton, I think, was the big one to put him ahead. It's funny because reviewing this yesterday, and I also do a podcast where I do talk about things like this from the prior day, almost everything in this lineup came from the 4 p.m. games, which is also rare to see, right? You had Goff to all these guys, DJ, Godwin, Disley, and Sutton, all from the 4 p.m. games. He only had, I think, 2 guys, which were Chubb and the Patriots defense from the early games. So it was literally all 4 p.m. games to come back and win the milli, which is, again, you have to pick pretty perfect, I'd say, to do that, and he did. Yeah,
he certainly did, man. So yeah, 6 of his top 4 lineups were all Jared Goff, and he had 6 Jared Goff lineups in total. But yeah, like you said, Chubb was not a bad play, but he was also 3% owned. He had James White at 6% in the second best lineup. It was a top 50. I throw this out there because they were very, very close together. So that, I think that's an interesting thing too, is when you're looking at these Goff lineups, of which he had 6, Manny, they were very, very similar lineups for the most part. You know, they both had Godwin running it back. They both had Cup. They both had Woods. They both had Disley. They both had Cortland Sutton. I mean, it was really only, you know, one or two differentiators here between McCaffrey, David Johnson, and Chubb and James White. And of course, the defense, which had Patriots and then Ravens, which is a 26-point swing.
Yeah, it's if you look in a little more in depth, and you can go in and actually click. So on the right side of lineup study, we have a player usage player usage tab, right? Where if you click it, it'll come out, and you can kind of see the view you see in your own fantasy cruncher. Where if you click Jared Goff, you'd also see that he had 100% Cooper Kupp with Goff,
Yeah.
and then he had 83% Robert Woods with Goff, right? This isn't every single entry in the millie. This is about 250,000. So we have most of them. Again, pulling this many entries for a tournament is just a huge load on the server or whatever. And we have just a slight restriction here. But even then, you see that almost all of them came with Kupp and Woods, barely any Cooks, but all of them also came with Godwin as the one to run back. So if you're wondering maybe why they're so close together, yeah, he pretty much had the same core of Goff stacks, right? It was Goff to Kupp, Woods, and Godwin coming back. When you have that combination, I mean, that's the combination you wanted yesterday from that game specifically, right? And then it's just a matter of differentiating at your running backs. He used DJ McCoy, Gurley even had a Gurley share in there. I think Disley he had 30% of, and then differentiating the defense, which he only had two, Patriots and Ravens. So yeah, really, really tight lineups, but obviously really good ones because he hit the nuts pretty much.
Do you like that approach? Say you only have like 6 of a certain quarterback and a stack. Would you rather do it like have a really tight core and then just differentiate with a few guys? So if that core does hit, you're giving all of those lineups a shot?
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. I do that. I think
agree.
I think you have a little more of Goff than 6 lineups. I had projected
But
somewhere
I'm
around
saying
10.
if you only do have 6 like he does.
Sure. Even if you have 6, I think you have to run a tight core because your group will kind of dictate that, right? You only pair Cooks, Woods, or Kupp with Goff, and then running it back yesterday, I had about 11 lineups that I made. I didn't enter them, but I made with Goff, and I think 10 of them had Godwin coming back too. So this does seem correct. Actually, he played this very, very well.
Yeah, he certainly did. And you know, kind of going back to what we were saying a minute ago, how much Godwin did he have in total? He had,
I'll tell you right now, he had
why am I
those
missing?
those 6 lineups. So the 6 Goff lineups were the 6 Godwin lineups.
Yep, that's
So
it.
I told you that's how it should have been yesterday. Mm-hmm.
Yep, that's incredible, right? Because really, you look at it, game stacks, man. It's not how you win it every time, but you know, I went back and looked at all of the top 10s from the Millie Makers from week 1 through 17 last year, Manny, and the large majority had at least, you know, 3 players from the same team with one being run back from the opponent.
For sure. It's such a high upside strategy. I cover this all the time. I mean, people who aren't doing this, and believe me, there are so many in tournaments that still do not team stack or game stack, which to me is crazy. And expect to win these large field tournaments. If there's 300 entries in a tournament, it only makes sense for you to go for the home run, right? It doesn't make sense for you to play it safe, then go play cash games, right? Go play cash games if you want to play it safe and only stack one receiver with your quarterback, not run it back or whatever. Essentially, you want to predict a shootout and you want to have everyone from the shootout. That's the highest possible upside in football. It's the reason we do it in baseball, right? You want a team to score 10 runs, then have everyone who scored the runs on that team. Same thing in football because there is a lot of correlation. Everyone should be doing this.
For sure. In the single entry SPY 50K to first, Mr. Matos won 50 grand on a Winston, Godwin, Howard stack with it run back with Robert Woods. So you don't have to. Oh, you know what? Todd Gurley as well. Look at that. So yeah, 5-player, including the quarterback there. No, wait, he had Evans too. Look at that.
Yep.
So man,
that was a big time stack then.
Big time stack. So he had Winston, he had Gurley, he had Evans, Woods, Godwin, and Howard.
It's like a 5-man, 6-man stack.
I think it's a 6, right?
Yeah, 6-man stack. 2 and 3. Yeah, 6-man stack. That's incredible.
That
Very
is
nice.
wild. 221.6 fantasy points. Christian McCaffrey as a filler. Dontrell Inman and Panthers D. So literally only two players that weren't from that game.
Yeah, that I think is a little excessive, but when it shoots out like that, I mean, listen, there's going to be so much production that anyone can do it, right? You can play as many players. I know Osimo from reviewing him a few times. He loves those big six mans, and yesterday would have. I think he also had a pretty decent day where it was this same game that catapulted him to the top. It's you love taking risks because you can make a lot of you can make a big chunk of money coming back just right off of one game. That's really all it takes in NFL. And yesterday we had an opportunity. Hopefully people were on it.
Yeah, no question. And it is possible to win without stacking, but do you think there's any merit to that in these huge milli makers or the $9 slant where there's just so many entrants?
No, I mean, you need the upside for that, right? You need the upside. Essentially, what you're doing with no stacking is you want to project every single person correctly and all in the same lineup, which is it's so difficult. I think people have a hard time understanding just how difficult it is. I think some see some naked lineups near the top, right? And say, well, look, he didn't stack. You don't need to stack. What you're not seeing is how many people tried not stacking and didn't get up here too, right? Because it's very easy for me to look at the top 1% and say, well, there were 30 people who didn't stack and there were 20 people who did stack. Not stacking is much better. Well, I mean, there were also, 200,000 people that did not stack while 50,000 people stacked.
Right.
Now what's the difference, right? And that's where I think people get caught up.
And to take that a step further, I mean, yes, it's possible to not
Of
stack
course.
and get all of the top performers from the day, but the odds of you hitting all of those, like the odds of you having Fournette and Godwin with a naked quarterback, and Robert Woods, or say, Cooper Kupp, and Nick Chubb. It's just like you're trying to hit on all of those. What you're looking for is the optimal lineup. And oftentimes the actual optimal lineup, Manny, isn't a stack, right?
Correct.
Like you and I talk about it every Sunday. Manny and I do a show on SiriusXM Fantasy, Awesemo Fantasy Football Game Day. Check it out. Saturday, 5 to 7 p.m. Eastern, Sunday, 7 to 9. And we go over the optimal lineup on DraftKings every single week. And if you look at this lineup from yesterday, it was actually a game stack. But how many times already this year have we seen it where it wasn't a game stack at all? But that's the optimal lineup, right? And those are lineups that sometimes come in at 47,000 and not even close to the cap. So how are you going to land on that and have the Jets defense like last week against the Patriots, right? Or have just a complete wild variety of players across the board with no real correlation or connection. It's doable, and actually most weeks it'll probably be the case. But you can't look at the optimal lineup and say, I need to replicate that.
Yeah, no, it'd be impossible. I'd say just only and I'm not a fan of the users that analyze only the winners and make definitive assumptions off winners only, right? Because how many times have we seen articles say, well, out of last year's 17 milli makers, 11 did not stack or whatever. I mean, man, there's so much noise in something like that, right? Because what you're telling everyone is, 11 of the winners didn't stack. You all should not be stacking. When in reality, that's not accurate at all. Yeah, they won, and maybe that one person got lucky, or all those guys got lucky one time. But if I'm telling you there's a million people not stacking and 200,000 that are stacking, and then you see the ratios, I mean, which one would you play? Because I can also not stack and not hit anything for 2 years, and eventually in year 3 my non-stack will finally hit to where I finally project everyone correctly, and it's just I'm so far down and so far negative that the win almost doesn't matter. So listen, essentially you want to stack because in one play 2 people can score, right? And the more of those one play 2 people scores you have in your lineup, the more opportunity you have over everyone else who does not have that. So it's stacking is there for a reason. It works for a reason.
For sure. Um, the optimal lineup was Winston, Chubb, Gallman, Cup, Godwin, Woods, Hooper, Fournette, and the Patriots. I look at that and I say, all right, none of these were egregious. None of these were like downright egregious. Now, I personally was not that high on Leonard Fournette. Nick Chubb, definitely respected it as a play, but wasn't huge on him. That happens. But, guys like Gallman made sense. And when you look at the Winston, Cup, Godwin, and Woods, did we expect that game to shoot out and for the Bucs to put up 55 points to see 95 total points? No, of course not. But there was a good comment in chat just a minute ago. Let me see if I can find this. It was Huizer. Sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, but he said, so one site may not have said, I love Tampa Bay and the Rams full stack that game and win money. But if you're using the thought process and building multiple lineups, you could have landed on that. He was saying, he said, listen to these dudes. They're dropping knowledge on game theory and ways to win. So I think he makes a good point. It's not about saying simply in every spot, because here's the problem. There's one thing I hate, Manny, when it comes to doing analysis for this stuff. And that is the idea that you'll just say if you talk basketball and you're like, okay, I could see him as a good tournament player. Yeah, I like him too. And now you've named every player from every game, right? If you're just naming every team from every stack and saying, yeah, that makes sense, you're not really doing any favors. When you factor the actual thought process and the game theory into it, that's when it is actually probably more valuable than just giving out random plays.
Yeah, for sure. And I also dislike that very much. Like, you'll end up with a player pool the size of the entire United States. It's stupid. And if you follow that, you'd have a player pool that you actually used of 180 players. Like, it would make no sense. So essentially no touchdown really benefits you, and you're hoping for the one perfect lineup that you matched all these guys correctly. Essentially that it won't work either. It goes back to something I mentioned at the beginning of the show. Listen, as much as we want to say definitively, because both defenses are really, really bad, the New York Giants and the Redskins are going to shoot out, and everyone should have Daniel Jones, and, an underrated play is Case Keenum. The fact of the matter is that there is variance in this sport, right? There's variance in every sport, and it varies how much from sport to sport. I'd say football is somewhere in the middle between basketball and baseball, to where the short-term variance is not like baseball, to where it's extremely random. But it's also not basketball, where it's extremely projectable and we know how many minutes and fantasy points per minute everyone will get, more or less, right? It's somewhere in the middle. And if that's the case, listen, even the highest projected game can go under just a little bit, right? Even Mahomes can go an entire game without throwing a touchdown. Believe me, it happened yesterday, right? So if you understand that there is variance, even a game like, on paper, it was the Rams and Tampa. Oh, man, the Rams are great. Tampa, obviously, on the road, they're kind of bad, whatever. I mean, if we were playing the Giants and the Redskins at a 49 total, why are we not playing the Rams and Tampa at a 48.5 total? Right? It doesn't make any sense. Yet people are playing Matt Ryan against Tennessee, and there's a 46 total on the board, right? So it's I saw all the contrarian Josh Rosen stacks. For what reason? I don't know. By far the lowest projected team, right? So a lot of people are making, I'd say, dumb assumptions and dumb moves right up to lock, to where they're trying to justify after the fact and see maybe ownerships and say, well, there's no way anyone should have landed there. Yeah, there is. Let's just open our mind a little more. We made a couple mistakes, and let's just make sure we don't make it going into week 5. And that's all really we can do. We can't hindsight this and say, you should have not, or I should have. Just we can get better and go to week 5 and try to be better that way.
Right. Yesterday, I was not particularly high on Will Dissly just based on that expected ownership.
Sure, same here.
Will Dissly ended up having a pretty solid game. I can live with that. It's also unfortunate that most other tight ends outside of like Austin Hooper, were not that big. But I think we talk about it a lot, what makes good and bad chalk. maybe I'm wrong there that with the Disley in tournaments, was not a must, but it happens and you move on. And it's not that every week Will Disley is going to burn you by fading him. And Marcos in chat says, I asked yesterday if Gallman was a must, just like Aguilar the week before, and they were wrong. My fault for punting on good chalk. What do you make of that performance, and what makes good chalk to you?
It's a combination of a few things. We spoke about this on Sirius yesterday, right? I think both are completely different. Nelson Aguilar part of a passing game where there really wasn't anyone, and then the other one is a running back.
Jeffrey, and Jackson were
out.
Goddard was limited to the point where he was only going to see a few snaps. Yeah,
correct. So I mean, unless you think Carson Wentz is throwing for 50 yards the entire game, I mean, I don't know how you would have gotten there, right? But clearly the next best option for the price tag I thought was okay, but I legit thought he could have got you 15 plus with upside for 20. And that's the reason I played him. I didn't play him because he was cheap enough. In Gallman's case, I don't know. I didn't think he'd see. I think he would see volume, but there were so many other running backs on the slate that I thought, I mean, I don't need to go to Gallman. And his projection compared to, I don't know, McCaffrey's projection or Fournette's projection, which I liked Fournette a ton. I even liked Chubb at his ownership too a ton. And it was not really a Gallman thing. It was just there's so many other running backs I love that it's really tough for me to go to Gallman. Also, we talked about it yesterday. If you saw the game, I don't want to say anyone got lucky, but I think the production we saw from Gallman yesterday was a bit lucky. He was clearly the last progression on his receiving touchdown. I thought Daniel Jones was going to throw it away almost. And then he got a goal line carry. I think he averaged 3.5 yards per carry. He didn't do anything well. He didn't even play in the passing game well. So it was just timely stuff. Again, football variance. But even then, even without Gallman, I thought people should have had a very good week. So I didn't think that was an issue.
All right. Well, let's and I don't disagree with that at all. Like I said, I thought Gallman, at least you would expect to see a decent amount of volume. Now, let's keep in mind the flow of that game was I think no one thinks the Skins are good, but I didn't know that it was that bad. Like to the point where you score 3 points against a New York Giants defense that has been horrendous, Manny, through the first 3 weeks of the season. It happens. With Disley, like I said, projecting him at I don't know, say 5 for 50 and a touchdown, which is around where he got. That's fine. On most nights, that's not going to kill you if you fade him, though. So it's a give or take scenario. I still had Disley. I just didn't have as much as the field. Let's see. In chat, what is this? Yeti Express says, Christian McCaffrey floor is lowered by 10 without Cam. He doesn't get receptions. Didn't he have like 10 receptions yesterday?
He had 10 receptions. Fun fact, Christian McCaffrey through 4 weeks has only sat 4 snaps. It is by far the most ludicrous thing I've ever seen in my life.
Amazing.
The guy's a machine. He doesn't get tired. He'll run. He'll pass catch. He'll pass block. He'll do absolutely everything. Through 4 weeks, just think about that.
I know.
If you think the floor is lowered somehow, this might be the highest floor ever for a running back. I don't even know how to explain this. I don't know how that's lowered at all.
Amazing. He didn't sit a single snap through the first 2 weeks of the season.
Yeah, he played 100% through 2 weeks. The next 2 weeks, he's only sat 4. Poor dude. And they said coming into the season, they were going to limit his snaps a little more because they thought they played him too much last year. Okay.
So I'm actually, we have news. Not that it really matters that much because it's a defense or a defensive one, but it's pretty big, just in the sense of what happened and what the penalty or the punishment was. Vontaze Burfict was just suspended for the rest of the game or the rest of the season.
Yeah, I mean, you have to. I mean, he's actually taking it overboard, right?
I mean that was as much of a headhunt as you could ever think of.
I mean, did you saw it, right? Like,
and I'm watching it again, right? But this isn't the first time he's pulled some shit.
Right, correct. It's because of it's repeat offenses for him. Like, this is ridiculous. I mean, what are you trying to do to people? I mean, it's a game, right? It's a game. I get it. You're physical. You want to be known as a hard hitter or whatever, but I mean, you are putting people's lives in danger when you're aiming for the head every single time.
Yeah, this is actually one of the worst. It's one of the worst hits you'll
It's
you'll
it's
see.
horrible. It's horrible.